And today, we'll conduct a brief analysis of the public mourning texts and statements released by industry insiders following Menglong's death. After Menglong's studio announced his passing on September 11th, a number of peers spoke publicly on social media platforms. At first glance, these posts appear to be ordinary expressions of grief. Yet when read together, they display clear stratification in content, emotional intensity, and linguistic choice. Taking into account debut timing, professional proximity, collaborative history, and expressive style, a patterned distribution becomes visible, one that closely tracks fear, risk perception, and positional awareness within the industry. Among Menglong's Superboy contemporaries, the language is strikingly restrained and symbolic. Hua Chenyu posted only a single candle emoji. Bai Zhugang wrote a romanticized passage describing Menglong as having arrived at a place where night never falls, translating death into a distant, softened image. Meng wrote that a world full of flowers exists wherever you are. Yu Tian offered a brief, brother, rest in peace, accompanied by praying hands emojis, while Zhuo Li wrote, may there be no suffering there, again using candles to mark the message. None of these posts reference disbelief, shock, or inquiry. Even grief is rendered abstract, aestheticized, and emotionally indirect. At a surface level, such expressions do not appear abnormal or insincere, but their most notable features are absences. For peers of similar age and career trajectory, people who shared stages, schedules, and formative years, there is no attempt to grapple with what happened, nor even to signal confusion. Emotion is encoded symbolically rather than spoken directly. This is characteristic of safe language in high-risk environments. The presence of perceived danger narrows expression to forms that are culturally legible, yet politically neutral. Artists who had worked directly with Menglong show a different, though still bounded, mode of mourning. Zhou Shun wrote that Menglong's beauty would remain in people's hearts and wished him peace in the other world. Yang Mi echoed this formula, addressing him as fourth brother, again accompanied by candle emojis. Dilraba framed her message through the roles Menglong played, emphasizing his gentleness both on-screen and off, before concluding with, forever remembered. Zhang Tianai offered a more concrete memory, recalling their first meeting 10 years earlier when he brought her juice outside her dormitory. Yet her post ends abruptly. I never imagined I would have to say goodbye to you today. I can't say it. Compared with the male contemporaries, these statements contain more emotional texture and personal memory. Grief is expressed more openly, perhaps reflecting gendered norms of emotional expression in the industry. Still, clear limits remain. The sadness deepens, but questions are not raised. The narrative stays firmly at the level of personal remembrance, stopping short of any engagement with circumstances or responsibility. Zhang Kaili's long Weibo post, published on the evening of September 11th, represents a different category altogether. Her eulogy is expansive, detailed, and emotionally saturated. She recounts repeated encounters with Menglong, praises his humility and warmth, recalls gifts exchanged, missed meetings, and small gestures of care. On the surface, it appears deeply personal. Analytically, however, it is highly standardized. Throughout the text, Menglong's death is framed as something unfathomable rather than unacceptable, hard to comprehend rather than wrong. Zhang repeatedly asks questions that have no object. How am I supposed to understand this? Rather than, what happened? Emotion is used to seize the narrative from the outset. Oh my God, I truly can't believe it. Establishing grief as the only legitimate mode of response. Any potential inquiry is preemptively absorbed by emotion. She also carefully delineates limits to her knowledge, noting that they never worked together in a drama, only met at events. This simultaneously establishes her right to grieve and her distance from the facts. Menglong is portrayed as gentle, passive, pure, qualities that invite sympathy but foreclose analysis of pressure, conflict, or resistance. Everyday details, such as an expensive scarf he chose for her, or his reluctance to let her spend money on flowers, redirect attention away from what he may have endured. The text ultimately resolves itself through the language of impermanence. Life is unpredictable, a move that shifts the narrative from responsibility to fate. This is a textbook example of totalitarian kitsch. Abundant, seemingly sincere emotion substitutes for structural questioning. The result is a polished, emotionally complete text that invites mourning while neutralizing inquiry. Similar patterns have appeared in public responses to the deaths of figures such as Coco Lee, Godfrey Gao, and even frontline medical workers during the pandemic, where grief is amplified and system-level accountability is quietly erased. The contrast becomes sharp when we turn to Hong Kong artists. On September 14th, Daniel Chan openly asked why no witnesses had spoken, why potential evidence had vanished, and why posts were being deleted. He questioned the absence of cameras, testimonies, and investigation, explicitly calling for fairness. His post was soon removed. Jenny Tseng went further. Posting on a grey background, she described the era as absurd, decayed, and hopeless, filled with tens of thousands of whys. She wrote bluntly that without investigation, there could be no justice, only an international joke, predicting that a few scapegoats would be sacrificed while the system remained intact. She named unspoken rules and warned that victims were growing younger. Daniel Chan later returned on September 24th with a declaration that silence brings no safety and that speaking out was the only path toward light. These posts overstep boundaries that mainland artists do not approach. Their rapid deletion and containment highlight, by contrast, how unusual the absence of questioning is among mainland figures. A small number of mainland industry voices edged closer to that boundary. Liu Wei, a television host, wrote that Menglong deserved an explanation and shared messages from makeup artist Song Se describing the family's collapse in grief. Song Se himself condemned the industry as filthy and said Menglong had been destroyed by it. Liu Wei's post was quickly deleted. Actor Yang Fuyu questioned the accidental fall explanation directly, asking why legal responsibility applies to ordinary citizens but not to the entertainment industry, and rejecting attempts to attribute the issue to vague notions of capital. Actor Zhang Guoqiang, by contrast, stayed within safer territory, invoking moral retribution without addressing structure. The most revealing language appears not in formal posts, but in a fragmented comment section exchange by a makeup artist who had worked closely with Menglong. Her words are repetitive and emotionally raw. "He was really good. I can't take it. I can't accept this." She repeatedly affirms his kindness and innocence, stresses that she worked with him for 3 years, and states only one concrete claim: what happened was not an accident. When asked for details, she gives none. This is not calculated silence, but fear shaped by proximity. Her language circles around a black hole. Emotion overflows, but facts cannot be named. "I can't let go," she writes, a phrase closer to trauma than grief, suggesting being stuck at the point of rupture. She knows something, suffers because of it, yet cannot speak. Her only remaining action is to protect the deceased's moral image through repetition. "He was really good." This is not weakness, it is resistance at the limit. In a system that converts structural violence into personal tragedy, her insistence on innocence is the furthest she can go. Taken together, these texts map a gradient of fear within the entertainment industry. The closer one is to the event, the more intense and fragmented the emotion, and the narrower the language. The farther one is from the mainland system's center, the more explicit the questioning becomes. Mourning here is not just an emotional response. It is a regulated practice, revealing how silence is produced, maintained, and internalized. In summary, aside from a small number of questioning or angry voices that were swiftly erased, the entertainment industry's mode of mourning has been strikingly homogeneous, emotional, privatized, and systematically evasive of institutional responsibility. The most frequently repeated phrases, heartbroken, so painful, can't believe it, rest in peace, circulate endlessly. These tributes are emotionally sincere, yet they remain confined to the realm of feeling. They stop short of engaging with the questions the public actually cares about. In effect, such expressions accept the existing conclusion surrounding the death and treat it as something that requires no further discussion. Differences in expressive style arise not from differing moral positions, but from differing levels of fear, levels shaped by one's position within the industry. Take the long-term makeup artist as an example. Her statements are marked by intense emotion and intuition. She repeatedly emphasizes, "He was a good person," "I can't accept this," and "this wasn't accidental," yet consistently avoids concrete details or explicit attribution. Her language reflects a judgment formed through close, daily contact, that the problem did not lie with the individual himself. This judgment emerges from the abnormal pressure and atmosphere she experienced in her working environment. What she perceives is the existence of risk, not its structure. By contrast, consider the reaction of Tiffany Chen, wife of Charles Huang. During a live stream, when viewers repeatedly urged her to speak out for Yu Menglong, she did not respond verbally. Instead, she typed a single line, "This can't be talked about." This is not an emotional reaction, but a structural risk assessment. What she knows may not be the details of the event itself, but the boundaries surrounding it. People at Tiffany Chen's level may not understand exactly what happened, but they are deeply familiar with power structures and linguistic taboos. Which events are unspeakable? Which topics cross red lines? Such judgments are not instinctive. They are accumulated through long-term experience at the intersection of power, capital, and politics. Accordingly, fear within the entertainment industry displays a clear structural gradient. The closer one is to the concrete event, the more likely emotion overwhelms restraint. The closer one is to the upper echelons, the calmer, more controlled, and more rapid the turn towards self-silencing. The makeup artist and Tiffany Chen thus occupy opposite ends of the fear spectrum. One end says, "I know this wasn't an accident, but I don't know what it means." The other says, "I know exactly what it means, which is why it cannot even be discussed." It is precisely this structural fear that allows different layers of the industry to maintain collective silence through self-restraint. Viewed solely from within the industry, this mode of mourning strictly adheres to the unspoken rules that gave rise to the incident itself. It is a textbook manifestation of the chilling effect. When the lens widens to society as a whole, these widely circulated tributes simultaneously become components of the official narrative. What the public sees are prominent figures expressing sincere grief, profound regret, and quiet acceptance, without questioning the framing. Within this context, a death marked by serious irregularities is repackaged as the unpredictability of life. And thus, even when acts of mourning originate in self-preservation or genuine emotion, they are inevitably absorbed into the system of public opinion guidance. They provide ready-made templates for the official narrative. When confronted with such a death, the appropriate response is sorrow, remembrance, and acceptance, not inquiry into investigative procedures, criminal possibilities, or responsibility. This process unfolds in parallel with official cleanup campaigns. Channels of expression are tightly controlled, isolated bursts of dissent are rapidly suppressed, and compliant voices are amplified through repetition, stabilizing the opinion ecosystem within the firewall. Even when some manage to speak out by bypassing the Great Firewall, those in power are not particularly alarmed. They understand that as long as the internal narrative remains unified, most people will eventually internalize their doubts and trauma as an unchangeable reality, recalibrating their emotions to accommodate the existing order. In this way, questioning is marginalized and compliance normalized once again. This is a classic method by which totalitarian systems manage emotion, and a paradigmatic example of totalitarian kitsch applied to moments of sudden crisis. Finally, I want to address a question that is often overlooked. What is the minimum standard of a normal society? In modern human rights thinking, freedom from fear is among the most fundamental rights. It does not mean that a society is free of crime. Rather, it means that people do not have to worry about retaliation, punishment, or unpredictable consequences simply for expressing views, asking questions, or challenging those in power. When people feel compelled to calculate whether even mourning might cross a line, when they must guess how authorities will react before raising questions, when silence stops being a choice and becomes an instinct for self-preservation, then fear has already become the organizing principle of that society. Throughout this series, we have repeatedly pointed out how deeply Xi Jinping's system of governance relies on fear. Under Xi's rule, the level of structural fear imposed on Chinese society has surpassed that of any leader since Mao Zedong. Yet this is not a personal quirk of Xi himself. It is a defining feature of totalitarian systems. From Nazi Germany to the Soviet bloc to modern theocracies, fear has always functioned as a core instrument of rule. Many Chinese people who grew up during the Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao years experienced a comparatively looser social atmosphere. As a result, they often misinterpret China as merely a country without democratic elections. I once shared this misunderstanding. When I first went abroad to study, I was a typical nationalist, defending Beijing's positions, on Tibet for instance, and trusting the narratives I had been taught for years. But propaganda inevitably contains cracks. Once one is noticed, others follow. With curiosity and access to information, seeing the broader picture becomes only a matter of time. Much of the confusion surrounding the Menglong case stems from an incomplete understanding of the Chinese Communist Party's history. Here, I strongly recommend the late historian Gao Hua's book, How the Red Sun Rose, which details the Yan'an rectification movement. In this series, we have repeatedly compared Xi Jinping's 2014 speech at the Beijing Forum on Literature and Art with Mao Zedong's speeches at the Yan'an Forum on Literature and Art in the 1940s. Mao's speech was not merely cultural guidance, it was a prelude to political purification. Its real purpose was to legitimize a massive campaign of fear that forced absolute obedience to a single leader, laying the foundation for extreme power concentration and personality cults. After the founding of the People's Republic, Mao extended this method to the entire society. From land reform to the anti-rightist campaign, the logic remained the same. Define certain groups as enemies, subject them to persecution or elimination, and thereby discipline everyone else. Only the targets changed. The true scale and brutality of these campaigns remain taboo inside China and are still heavily censored. Xi Jinping's trajectory after 2014 shows striking parallels. Once this continuity is recognized, it becomes easier to understand why actions that appear to ordinary people as spontaneous anger or resistance to unwritten rules are interpreted at the highest levels of power as existential threats, sometimes serious enough to justify lethal outcomes. A historical example helps illustrate this logic. Wang Shiwei, a young intellectual who traveled to Yan'an in the late 1930s, was caught in Mao's lure the snake out of its hole tactic during the rectification movement. His crime was publishing an essay criticizing internal inequality, famously describing how clothing came in 3 colors and food in 5 ranks. For this, he was turned into a warning example, arrested in 1943, tortured for years, and finally executed in 1947 on Mao's orders. 80 years later, the underlying logic remains the same. What has changed is the method. Under Xi, repression is more subtle. Fear is no longer generated primarily through mass political campaigns, but through systematic depoliticization and deliberately vague boundaries. Instead of erupting all at once, fear is normalized and absorbed into daily life. People slowly lose the ability to sense danger, like being boiled in warm water. Yet even those who consider themselves uninterested in politics find it difficult to ignore Menglong's abnormal death and the series of highly unusual responses that followed. Despite aggressive censorship and propaganda efforts aimed at redirecting public reaction toward grief, fatalism, and emotional acceptance, the case continues to provoke doubt. As long as basic common sense remains intact, the conclusion is unavoidable. When a death marked by serious irregularities and multiple witnesses fails to trigger even the most basic criminal investigation, and when public questioning itself becomes something to suppress, then whether China under CCP rule can be considered a normal society is no longer a difficult question. Alexander Solzhenitsyn once wrote, "My homeland is a mental hospital." Just days ago, on January 24th, the chief patient of another such mental hospital purged his last remaining pillar of support. From Xi Jinping's security logic, this was not surprising. What is striking, however, is that even Zhang Yuxia, the second most powerful figure within the Chinese Communist Party, was not spared. This can only intensify fear and insecurity within the ruling elite itself. Meanwhile, Xi's long-running attempt to re-anchor the CCP's legitimacy, from economic performance to revolutionary bloodline, has clearly failed, as reflected in public reaction, and has in fact further damaged the party in the process. Yet he continues to press ahead with extended rule. The absence of genuine legitimacy leaves repression as the only substitute, driving governing costs ever higher. Under Xi, spending on so-called stability maintenance has turned into a fiscal black hole. As governing costs rise and the economy contracts, pressure no longer rests at the social periphery. It penetrates the ruling structure itself, disrupting the internal allocation of power and protection. Dictators do not ultimately fall to public anger. They fall to defection from within. This is the logic driving Xi Jinping's permanent purges. But purges do not create security, they dissolve it. Each attempt to eliminate uncertainty generates more of it, lowering trust, shortening time horizons, and accelerating internal decay. The signals are already visible. They are appearing more often, with less effort to conceal them, and with diminishing capacity for control.